This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
This week on Believe in People, we go exploring.
Because Tab Murphy loves the wilderness and he loves sharing it on the big screen.
In fact, his first writer's credit was for Gorillas in the Mist, the story of Diane Fossey. Tab, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I appreciate it.
Well, we're happy here. And I'm sorry, you're in the midst of in the LA fires, and I know you were away for that part of it in Washington, but I just want to sort of start with that first. How are you doing? How are your friends doing?
I'm doing fine. I mean, where I live was quite far removed from the actual burns, the flames, and the devastation in both Altadena and Pacific Palisades, but I certainly have plenty of friends that are affected, and so that's difficult when you care about people and their lives have been upended shockingly in a way that is so fast that they couldn't save any part in some cases of their life. I mean, the nostalgic parts of their life, photos, it's all gone.
Yeah.
So I just can't imagine what a lot of them are going through, and it's heartbreaking in that sense, for sure.
It's sort of it's a difficult irony because we are going to be speaking to you today about your love of nature, about the fact that you were essentially a student of nature and then ended up taking that love of nature into the filmmaking world. But it is an awful and awesome sight when nature turns against you, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think it's easy to get comfortable and to just take nature for granted a little bit. Years go by, say, without an earthquake, you get a little, and then boom, something happens, or
Yes.
the fires, or you are far removed from Tornado Alley and you just think it's never going to happen to you, and then suddenly your town is wiped out. And it's every year, I spend a lot of time up in Canada, and every year we lose people to avalanches, backcountry hikers, things like that. It's awesome, awe-inspiring, and terrifying at the same time. Nature can be, so.
Yeah, it's so true. And actually, Tab, so my question, how did you go from forestry to film? Like, what was the moment that you said, okay, I'm making this switch? And first of all, any regrets on that too?
Well, I grew up in the mountain. I grew up, camping and fishing and my backpacking, and I grew up in my love of nature. It probably from the earliest memories I have was always about, I had aunts and uncles on my mom and my dad's sides that loved to hunt and fish and camp and hike and go out into, see. So I was always a part of that. So I just naturally, as I got into school and continued my passion for the outdoors, thought about a career that would, match that passion. Concurrently, though, which is interesting, at the very earliest of age, I was writing stories.
Oh.
So but I didn't really pay too much attention to that. It was fun. I kind of had a great time in creative writing classes through middle school, through high school, had teachers that were like, I had to go. I remember one time in middle school, I wrote a story, and I don't know where this came from, but it was a story of a young Lakota boy going on his first buffalo hunt with his dad and his father and other warrior members of the tribe. He kind of screws up and he's left behind to hold the horses while they will go off. And this was supposed to be his sort of rite of passage. And as he's standing there feeling down about what he did and beating up on himself, a lone buffalo bull appears on the horizon. And he mounts his pony and he goes out, and there's this great battle, and he succeeds in bringing it down. So when the men return and see what he's done. Now, why was I writing that in seventh grade? That's my question to me.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
like, where did that story come from? Why would I write? So
Yes.
my teacher was so impressed with the story, I had to go into the other block class and read it. Now, I was a total like nerd, a shy, girls terrified me, and I have to stand up in front of this big, block class and read my story. I was like, wow, that was, but I'll say this, I was terrified, I shook, and I got through the story as quickly as I could, and as I was exiting, and everybody squeezing out through this one little door, this girl who I didn't know said to me, "I really liked your story."
Wow.
And so I carried that with me, sort of, wow, like that feeling of like of creating something that somebody responded to, you know, uh, I think stayed with me as a little sort of worm in my brain. Because to answer your question, I went to Washington State University, my first year of university, convinced I was going to be a forest ranger or get into some sort of forestry that would keep me outdoors. But I quickly, the romantic idea I had of what a forest ranger did versus what they really do was a bit of a shock to my system, especially when my class load was full of biochemistry, biology, but like these
Wow.
things like, wait a minute, where's campfire building 101 and riding the range and saving, damsels in
Dudley Do
distress.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So I remember specifically the specific answer to your question, Amy. I came home one day and I was frustrated because I just felt like this is not really what I thought it was going to be. So I remember literally standing in front of my mirror in my little, dorm room and looking myself and saying, what do you really want to do with your life? And just being prepared for whatever came out of my mouth. And the thing that came out of my mouth that surprised me somewhat is like, I want to go to Hollywood and get into the movie business. That's what I
Oh,
really want to do. Because I had loved movies as a kid. And so I just kind of like, I immediately called my folks up. I'll never forget it. Dialed up my mom and dad and said, yeah, this isn't working out over here, I think. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, you know what I think I want to do? I think I want to go to Hollywood and get into the movie business. Dead silence, right? Like dead silence for like 5 beats. But I have to say, my parents, that's kind of a critical point where well-meaning parents could have derailed my dreams and
mhm.
often derail other dreams because they don't know anything about it. They're scared. You're going to where? Los Angeles? I why don't you just just stay in school, finish what you're doing. If you still feel the same way, then maybe you can think about that stuff. My parents didn't do any of that. They
Wow.
just said, you know, if that's what you really want to do, we don't know a thing about it, but we'll support you. Go, you know. And
Well,
so I went to a counselor the next day at WSU. I said, I want to go to a film school. Where should I think about going? I didn't know anything. They said, well, and she looked up. She didn't know anything. Like, oh, well, there's film school, a good one in New York, and there's at UCLA or USC. So those are your choices. And back in those days in 75, I mean, that was the choice, right?
Yeah.
Those were the choices. So I applied. I flipped the coin. I knew I wasn't going to go to NYU. I'm a West. The West is the best. I believe Jim, Morrison said it best. Uh,
he
and
said a few other things too.
yeah, he did say a few other things too. But so I applied. I flipped the coin, and it landed on USC. And I applied to USC, and that the rest is history. I got on a plane at 19 that following September. I got accepted straight into the film school. I got on a plane at 19, said goodbye to my parents, did not know a soul in LA, and away I went. I think that was partially naivete about, well, hey, here I go. I'm going to go you know, like, so it was exciting to me, and it wasn't, and later I learned, oh my God, how lucky I was to get not only accepted straight into film school, but like to suddenly find myself surrounded 24/7 by like-minded people
Yeah.
who wanted to be in the movie, who could talk the language I always dreamed of talking about movies, about cinematography, about this and that, and something that I just always held inside, bottled up, because I just didn't, nobody around me and my friends up in Olympia, Washington. Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
good movie. That's all they could say. Oh, that movie sucked. That was it. They didn't go beyond that.
But then again, that love of nature, what have you, when you're talking about Gorillas in the Mist, for example, which I guess was your first, was that it? I mean, did
Well,
that
I
did
had,
that influence you at all?
oh, absolutely. I mean, I had, I'd had a kind of a slow boat ride to finally, I mean, I went to USC. I It was expensive. I was kind of in that I couldn't get like a scholarship, and I didn't have, my parents were middle class. I couldn't get the kind of, what do they call it, student aid that I needed to go full time. So I had to go part time, and I worked at the same time. So it was, looking back, I mean, I just, it was hard, but I didn't really even consider, like, oh, this is too hard. I gotta go back to my comfort zone. I was there for a reason, and I didn't care how long it took. But
Oh,
ultimately I had to drop out of USC, and I actually had to move home for a year and work night crew on Safeway, just because I'd run out of money and my parents couldn't afford to help me.
yeah.
So I went back and lived in my bedroom, and I was working night crew, dude. So I was like, I worked all night, and then I'd come home and want to sleep, but there's still brothers and sisters were still living at home and like running around, and I still, like, I could go down to my old room is now my dad's office, and there's still a piece of tile in the above ceiling kind of that has a punch hole in it, because that was me standing on my bed punching the ceiling, saying shut up to my brothers and sisters as I was trying to get sleep. Oh my God. It was so yeah, so that was and that was probably the lowest point that I felt, because I was, at lunchtime at 2 a.m. sitting in a little kitchen area with a bunch of guys that were, that was their job. They were there for life, and they'd like, what are you, why are you here? What are you doing? And I'm like, well, I really want to go make movies. And they're like, yeah, right, okay, kind of the eye roll, like it. So there was that
Sure,
kind of that year of and then I bought a motorcycle with
sure.
some of the money I'd made, and I literally strapped a typewriter, an old brother typewriter, onto the back, and I said goodbye to my parents, and I said, whatever happens, I'm not coming back. Boom, and away I rode all the way down to LA, and
Hey
yeah.
Ted, what writers do you admire? What screenwriters?
uh that's a good question. uh I mean, there's a million great screenwriters. I admire movies, and so therefore the writers that wrote them. I'm not, I can't sit here and tick off a bunch of names, to be honest. I mean, I could names, of course, Robert Town, and when I was coming up through film school, and George Lucas. I followed George at USC by a few years, so he'd already in 70. I was there in 75 and 76, just before Star Wars was released. And uh but I'll tell you this though. The one thing I did do, because I was down there thinking I wanted to make movies, I wanted to be a director. I wasn't really focused on writing as much as I thought,
Oh,
that I needed to be. And I took a screenwriting class, and by a
Robert
guy.
McKee.
No, 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 not Robert McKee. Um, I'm so bad these days, my memory, but Jim, oh boy. Anyway, he was not really a screenwriter. He was not really, but he was a brilliant teacher. You know what I'm saying? He didn't have credits
Yeah,
or anything. He was a brilliant teacher, and he taught me things in that first class. I'll never forget one of his first exercises. We had to go watch a movie over the weekend. We could choose any movie we wanted, and then we had to come into class the following, Monday, prepared to talk about the lead character of that movie. And so, as an exercise, he said, "Okay, I want you all to, whatever movie you watch, um, go into visualize the lead character's kitchen, visualize his or her refrigerator." Okay, you with me? Yeah, everybody. Okay. Go in, open that refrigerator, start listing what's in there. Now, go. And so you had to think about what kind of character that was, what would be in his or her refrigerator. So suddenly he's getting me and everybody else to think about character on a much deeper level than, oh, he's got a gun and he's shooting, he's a cowboy. Like suddenly you're going, you have to create three-dimensional characters. They have to resonate. And the kinds of things you need to know as a writer will never make it to the page, maybe, but it'll make it to the page in the way that character comes alive. Right. So that was a great exercise for me, and it stuck with me. And he took me aside and ultimately and said, "Look, everybody at this fucking school wants to be a director, dude." I mean, that's not, pardon my F-bomb.
No, it's
He
true
said,
though.
he said, "You have something special going on in your writing. If you, my advice, focus on that. That is the quickest way to get your butt into a director's chair. If you can write a great script, that's because I
Do you
knew a
write
lot.
to direct, Tap? Do you write to direct?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Not always. Uh, but I knew a lot of guys that had graduated. I knew a couple of guys that had gotten an MFA in film, and they had a nice reel under their arm, but they were tending bar, right? And I just thought, I can do. I'm just going to drop out, and so I dropped out like a week later, and I think it shocked Jim because he's like, "I didn't mean for you to drop out of school," like. But I saw my path. I saw
Yeah.
my path. Okay, I can write that, and
That's
I gotta,
great.
and work and make rent and all that other stuff. So that's really kind of how it all began, and then
Well,
ultimately, go ahead.
I have to ask because Gorillas in the Mist really interests me, and
Yep.
primarily because I've been there with my career at NBC. I actually went there,
Oh wow.
worked with I worked with Rosamund Carr, who was Diane Fossey's friend
Oh
in
yeah.
the bush there
Yeah.
with the Gorillas prior to Fossey's being murdered. But what did you find in Diane Fossey's refrigerator?
Oh, that's a great question. That's great, Kevin.
Well,
Yeah, no,
thank you.
no, well, it's interesting because uh, y you know, that whole project, I had sort of gotten a few jobs. I'd gotten it's, but I just kind of was not, I was waiting for what a lot of people call their big break, like, and, but when that project was put in front of me, it was almost like God had handed me the perfect thing for me to write at that particular point in my career. Not only was I grew up around very strong women, my mother, my grandmother. I mean, they're like my grandmother, one generation removed from pioneer. I mean, she still carried that sort of pioneer spirit forward. And as a young kid growing up, being around her was amazing and daunting at times too. But so as I started in and truthfully, Kevin, to answer your question, I didn't really have a understand what might have been in Diane's refrigerator at that moment in that meeting. But as I did my research and got to know who she was and got to know a little bit more, and I just pulled from really great sources, including somebody who had spent time with her twice on at Karasoke making documentaries about her work with trying to stop poaching, et cetera, et cetera. This whole sort of picture came to fruition for me. She was a very she was she had such a kind and gentle demeanor and spoke softly in one on the one hand, but she could be a fierce warrior, like passionate and not always kind to her students' demeanor on the other hand.
Yes.
So she was like, I don't want to say Jekyll and Hyde-ish a bit, but she had that ability to, like intimidate the hell out of you. I remember Bob was the guy that was the documentary filmmaker that was up there. He told me this story. He said I was at a party. Diane loved to party. He said, "Oh my God, she would just, in her big kind of room, she'd invite people in. She loved to party, drink wine, but she was always, sort of always attentive to what was going on around her, who was going on around her, all those things." And he said, I'll never forget, they had some snacks out and there was this one snack plate, and there was one last one on there, and you know how that happens at a party, nobody wants to take the
Yeah.
last one. It just sits there like the lonely snack, wait, somebody grab
Everybody's
it.
way too polite.
Yeah. So Bob told me the story. He said, I saw it there, I grabbed it and I ate it, and suddenly Diane was at my side and she leaned into me and said, I now know something about you, and walked away. I mean, is that
There you go.
intimidating or what?
That's clever.
Isn't that?
Well,
And what
that's
was your next favorite project Tab after that?
Well, I guess it would have to be concurrently. A couple of things happened. When you do a movie like Gorillas in the Mist, it's high profile. You get nominated for an Academy Award. Suddenly, the doors open to you that
Yeah.
never opened before, and you're having meetings with people that can actually say yes in the room to something, not we'll send it up the flagpole 16 floors and see as it comes trickling back down what the answer is. So that was really exciting for me, and there was one project in particular called Last of the Dogmen, which was a script I'd written very early on. It was rough, but the idea was I thought was really cool and sort of encapsulated a lot of what I was passionate about: the outdoors, Native American culture, adventure, kind of a semi-romance between two very disparate characters. So that was I got an opportunity. I got a producer that believed in the script, and when I said I want to direct it, his head fell forward and banged on the desk, and he rose and he said, "Okay, well, like that's not what producers want to hear, from a writer."
No.
But he took it on. He said to me, "Tab, okay, fine. We'll partner. You can direct, but I'm telling you, this is gonna be a long, hard road. It just is. It just nobody likes a first-time director on a project, especially one they love." Uh, and he was talking about the studios in those days. So we're talking about the, sort of late 80s, early 90s. So that was happening, and we were going to meetings, and I literally turned down an offer at 20th Century Fox. They wanted to buy the script. They didn't want me as a director.
Yeah.
And I was broke, man. I was like, and I had to walk out of that room, and because I just did not want to give that one up. So I had to walk out of that room, and we're walking away, and the producer said, you realize what you just said no to, right? And I said,
Yeah.
kill me, kick me, kick me. But ultimately it all kind of worked out. And at the same time, Disney, I had the first couple of jobs I'd ever gotten was writing for Disney, for Paramount. And at those days, Eisner was the head of, Jeffrey Katzenberg was the the head of production, and a couple others. David Kirkpatrick was a creative executive in those days. So I was on their radar when they shifted. They took that whole team over to Disney, and I was on Jeffrey's radar as a writer that he had liked at Paramount, and he took over the animation division, and he wanted to do things a little differently that had been done before. He wanted actual script writers to come in, screenwriters to help fashion the stories, in that process. And so I was just somebody he kept reaching out to through his executives to say, hey, come in for a meeting, see what we're doing, see what we're working on. And I kept saying, no, no, no. I'm focused on this over here. I don't want to write kids movies. I like cartoons. I just don't, that's not what I really signed up for. I want to make this movie and I want to write big. I'm a serious writer, all that stuff. Uh, boy, was I wrong. So like I have the dubious distinction of having turned down Toy Story, other, other things that, had I said yes to or been open to at the time, but so a couple of things happened. Finally got my movie financed that we're going to make your movie, Tab. You get to direct it. However, the guy that we got to star in it, Tom Berenger, he had two other movies to do before he could get to ours. So there was this like 8 month lag before I could even go into pre-production or even talk about pre-production. And I was, I'm like, I'm a blue collar screenwriter. I still gotta pay my bills. And Disney called again right around then. And I said, Tab, why don't you just get over yourself and go in there and see what they got? You need a job. Stop being so precious about yourself. And it was a great lesson for me because sometimes opportunity doesn't just step up and scream in your face and you go, yes. Sometimes it just hovers around like an annoying gnat and you keep going, get out of here, get out of here. And then you like look at it, give it some attention, you go in, you have a meeting, and that led to Hunchback of Notre Dame, which
Oh, very cool.
if anybody knows me, I was a monster kid of the 60s. I grew up loving all the Universal, the Rogues Gallery of monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, and Hunchback, even though he was a man, was lumped into that Universal monster group. So I knew that story because I collected monster magazines and I just devoured monster movies as a kid. I knew that story, that tragic love story of Quasimodo Esmeralda from the time I was like 9 years old.
Huh.
So again, just like Gorillas in the Mist, this project is set in front of me and I just go, this is divine inspiration. How did I not know this was
Yeah.
going to be part of this meeting? And that ended up being a 12-year block of my career, writing for Disney, those four movies. And every
Huh.
one of them is a piece of me. I mean, Tarzan, he speaks to the wilderness part of me, all those, so everyone was just something I couldn't say no to. It was wild.
Well, as we reach the end of our time,
Oh my
we
God, I
always
hogged
ask
the
this.
whole thing.
It goes
Well,
by like that.
that's what you're supposed to do. But
Oh God.
every week we ask the same question, which is, why do you believe in people? But after listening to your story today, it's just so fascinating how determined you were, so determined that you'd get on your motorcycle and take off with your typewriter on the back. You sound a little bit like Steinbeck with his travels with travels with his dog. But let's turn the question around a little bit this week, and let's have you explain to our listeners, as opposed to why do you believe in people, why is it important for you to believe in yourself?
Well, boy, that's a great question because I think that's where everything starts, and I know that I grew up in a household where I was the oldest of five, um, and uh, I don't know. There's a lot of psychology about the oldest, the youngest, the middle, all that stuff. But in terms of like getting on a motorcycle or getting on that plane at 19 and going down, it wasn't so much that I believed in myself. In that moment, I just didn't know better. I thought everybody just followed their dreams, and this is what you do. You follow your dream. Everybody's doing it, though I'm doing mine. And I thought, well, next year or 5 years from now, movies are going to be made. Somebody's going to write those movies or somebody's going to make those movies. And I always thought, well, why not me? Like I never thought, oh, I can't do it because I didn't have this. I grew up in a small town. I have no contacts. Oh, I better just tuck my tail between my legs and turn away from that and go do something. And, I just never, again, it's not because I believe so much in myself, is because believe me, I got down there and there were times when I was like, Tab, what have you gotten yourself into? But it just was the idea that I, like I just like I say, I kind of call it naivete because I just thought everybody did what I was doing in that moment. Everybody follows their dreams. Everybody's making choices in their lives. And I never sort of really considered that a lot of people might have a dream that they don't pursue for whatever reason and feel maybe a little regret somewhere in their life later. I mean, the arts certainly does that. I can't tell you how
Yeah.
many people I talked to, like, I played clarinet and I always wondered if I could be in an orchestra, how cool that would be. And you hear these stories of when they were young a lot, and then the reality hits them in the face. When I was in LA, when I first arrived, I made friends with like 5 guys that all wanted to be screenwriters. And we would meet every week at a place down here near Universal Studios, a burger joint, cold beer, and we would trade ideas. We'd watch movies, criticize them. We'd trade pages, read each other's stuff. All that kind of was great. It was just great to have that. And then slowly but surely, their dreams changed, or one got married, and suddenly a baby's on the way, and suddenly responsibility that you didn't have at a year ago is changing the tune of your dream a little bit because you have to provide. So one by one, they all dropped away and they all went off and did other things. And I'm the only one that was, I guess, dumb enough to hang in there.
Well, we're glad you hung in there, Tab. Thanks so much for being on Believing People. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your story.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys. Kevin, drive safely. It's interesting.
Yeah, let's just be really clear. He is not driving. He's a passenger.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was going to say,
no, he's a passenger.
You are multitasking here.
I am the passenger. Anyway, so thank you, because the moral of today's story is follow your dreams, no matter how stupid or naive they are. So that's actually a good thing too.
And I like actually, why not me? I love that. That resonated
why
with why
not
not me?
For sure. I will end though with another thing that's very powerful that I've learned too. To identify something possibly to know what is not meant for you is almost as powerful to know what is meant for you. Okay. Or to strive after what you believe is meant for you and go for it. There comes a time when you have to also be real and say, maybe this isn't meant for me.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And you did that as a kid. Forestry school.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep, exactly.
Good on you, Tab. If you've enjoyed this episode, we appreciate you subscribing to Believing People. We'll see you next week.